Good morning and welcome to this webinar all about establishing a data management culture. Firstly, let's do a few introductions. My name is Andy Joss. I'm Head of Solutions and Data Governance from Informatica.
And I'm Melanie Parker. I'm the Principal Consultant for Agile Solutions, currently leading on data strategy, data governance and data security.
Geez, that sounds like a lot. But first of all, thank you for joining this morning. I just really wanted to start actually with a bit of a poll. Really to get a sense as to what you're all hearing out in the world. And really this poll is just to get a sense of whether your organizations are seeing digital transformation as a growth enabler. I mean, Mel, what are you seeing? Because you spend a lot of time with customers, you must be seeing lots of this.
Well, yes, Andrew. So what we're experiencing with some of our clients is that as much as we've got the technology agenda, a lot of it is to do with the basic data education, trying to understand how people want to use their information, what they want to get out of it, as opposed to just the pure play analytics, and really how that plays into the wider business strategy.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. And actually, just looking at some of the poll results that are coming in, actually, it's kind of interesting. We're actually not seeing anybody. I've just seen the first people coming in saying, yes, we've got a well-defined strategy that we're executing. Most people seem to be either in the, we're trying to implement something, or actually we're struggling to understand what it is we need to do. So I guess that gives us quite a good sense as to where people are at. I'll just close that poll now. Just give us a sense of, yep, we do have some which are kind of well on the way. I think we've got a reasonable chunk of people who probably need a bit of help in terms of actually what needs to be happening, or actually understanding, how are they going to make this work. So I guess good, useful feedback for us. So let's just kind of move on and just talk through what we're going to cover today. In terms of the story, it's really around this idea of a data management culture. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that is in a minute and how we see it used to help drive successful digital transformation. I think probably we'll start with a question, and that's really around this idea for many organizations. Are you trying to build a data-driven, intelligent enterprise for the future? Now, and I know it sounds like that's a lot of words, and yes, it is. But I guess that the real reason we're asking this question is if you look at a lot of the leading organizations across many different types of industries, and there's just a few examples that we're seeing on the slides here, organizations are recognizing how important strategically data is for their future. And many of these organizations you'll probably recognize as going through a digital transformation in one way, shape, or form. And data is obviously really key in terms of how they make that successful. So we've got examples here, obviously from Boeing, so obviously an aircraft manufacturer, through Siemens, Novartis, and across a range of industries. So data, I think organizations recognize how important that is to the success. And thinking about how people describe that, well, okay, it may be a little bit obvious, but this idea of it being a data-driven digital transformation, some organizations haven't necessarily quite twigged that yet, but I think many have. But actually, one of the things that we're seeing is for many organizations, this may feel very different depending upon which industry you're in. So if you're in retail banking, for example, a data-driven digital transformation may feel very, very different if you're a manufacturer or a retailer. And for many organizations, this is not a short-term change. It may actually be a multi-year journey. Some of the things that we're talking about are quite significant in terms of their impact, in terms of how organizations operate, but also the kind of business models that they're going to have. And we're going to talk a little bit about business models later on. And I guess then the big question is, well, why do you need to get there? What is it that's really driving all of this? And this kind of comes to one of the key themes that we're going to be talking about really across the whole of 2019. And that's this idea of transform, survive, and thrive. This idea that organizations are rapidly trying to transform what they do, whether it be driving new business models or looking at new products, new services, how they engage with clients. That transformation is happening across as many industries as we've already established. But for some, it's actually just about making sure they survive, actually getting through the next few years, and then how we build upon that to help organizations thrive in the future with these new digital economies and with these new users and consumers that many organizations and many industries are having to cope with. And this idea then of digital transformation, well, actually, if you think about the very high level roadmap for what this is going to look like, then we think about the business model for the future, how we transition from where we are today to where we want to be in the future. But we want to understand, okay, well, if that's why we're doing digital transformation, we also need to understand the data strategy that helps support that transformation of the business model. And that's really the what that we're going to be doing. And if we have a data strategy, then actually we need to think about the data organization which is really the how. So part of what we're going to be going through in this webinar today, but also some face-to-face roundtable events we have coming across throughout the rest of the year, is picking up on some of these topics. I will be going into some of them in a bit more detail, but really to give you a sense as to how we can see data really helping organizations drive that data-driven digital transformation. And if we think about some of the common outcomes, I get asked this question a lot. Okay, so we're going to do digital transformation, so actually what's it going to get us when we get to the end of that story? For some, it might be really quite basic stuff, like moving away from doing things on paper to doing it electronically. It might sound a little bit radical for some industries, but clearly it's quite important for others. New products and new services. Some might just think of a new slick app, really to get engagement going. Lots of organizations looking at automation and the change in the management of the business process, all the way through to fundamentally changing the relationship that organizations have with their customers and their suppliers. So some fairly common things that happen across a lot of different industries. But actually, I think there's probably a bit of a generic outcome on all of this, which is organizations, I think, are trying to adapt to be more targeted and focused on meeting the needs of their customers, because clearly customers are changing, whilst at the same time being more operationally efficient, just doing things better in terms of the way that we've always done them. And I like to think of this in a very particular way, actually. I think the digital transformation, it's really changing from where processes driven the data, where in the past we've been very process-centric, and data has really just been an enabler to make the process work. And I think in this new data-driven digital transformation world, I think we're moving away from that. And I think we're moving to something more fundamental, which is data driving the process. Now, I can well imagine there's probably people listening to this thinking, oh, hang on a second, that's quite a radical transformation. Yeah, it could be. And I can see you smiling, Mel, so I can guess you're probably hearing this conversation too. But actually, if you think about what this means fundamentally, once we understand data, given the context of what we're doing, it's about, well, where's the data going to take us? So rather than just rigidly following a process, where's data going to take us in terms of the journey with our customers, with our suppliers, with all the ecosystem that we're going to have to work with? And we're going to touch a little bit more on that later. But fairly fundamental, I think. But actually, this I get a lot. Well, actually, Andy, just think about this for a second. Actually, many organizations already have a data culture because we spend lots of time capturing data and we spend lots of time creating data and using data. We have a data culture, right? So we're in a good shape for digital transformation. Actually, I'd argue what's missing is not a data culture, but a data management culture. Okay, so we've kind of established that we think we need one of these. Have we? Well, okay, let's kind of explore that a little bit. Why do I need a data management culture? Well, actually, it's like any asset. Data doesn't look after itself, right? There's no magic data fairy that's going to come along and do all this thing for us. Data doesn't magically do what people need it to do without data maintenance and data care. Same as any asset, any physical asset, any organization that manages assets will know this. Data is absolutely no different. And I think it's a little bit of a change in emphasis around data. So I've just got a few examples here of what we consider the data culture to be like. And I guess many on the phone will probably recognize some of these things. But actually, organizations do understand the functional need for data. They're probably very proficient in collecting data, but also understand how to fix data, probably within a particular business unit or limited organizational scope. If it doesn't exist, then great. We know how to create things. And of course, this looks like the right data. There's kind of gut instinct kind of sense of how things work. In the data management culture, actually, we're saying we need to have a slightly different view and emphasis on that. And you just think about some of these examples, understanding the functional need for data. Well, actually, what we're looking for is an understanding of an organizational need for data. It might not just be data that's useful for me, but useful for other people in the organization. About understanding the collecting data, but actually let's collect the right data from the right place, rather than just collecting it from a place. Let's understand data in an organizational context, as in what does it mean? Who cares about it? Why is it important? And then sometimes just moving away from that gut instinct, which is it looks like the right data. So no, this is the right data. So it's about making decisions based on fact and certainty, or as much as that we can get. So we see data management culture as being a really good way for organizations to really understand what they're doing with data and how it's going to help drive the data-driven digital transformation.
Yeah, Andrew, that's really interesting because from my point of view as well, for those of you out there that are undertaking some data governance initiatives, A lot of people are moving around that maturity shift with getting to grips with some of that maintenance activity around data. But I do see it as being much more of a collaborative shift. So we still need the data governance, we still need those maintenance, those qualification elements to our data management. But if we have much more data collaboration in this space, I think we would be able to really look at that organisational scope that you referred to earlier.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? Well, we're looking at data science in its truest terms, so you'll still need to understand your trends and patterns and analytics within your data, and you'll still probably have some functional areas within the business to look after that. However, you've still got your data governance piece in the middle that takes out that data science. So for those people that will be looking for those patterns in the data, you've still got a qualification on that. However, that doesn't mean to say that just because you work in data governance or you've got data science departments that you can completely forget about the rest of the organisation. I think having a real basic education and understanding within your entire end user base will be much better to really think about how do we use this data in other areas of the business. When we work on programs and projects, it's not just to do with solution scoping or program scoping, but actually break down that siloed thinking and make it much more enterprise-wide.
So I guess actually we've maybe got a little bit of a precedent for this. So thinking about GDPR, when GDPR came along, lots of organizations spent time kind of training staff, your end users, as you have on the slide here, in terms of how to use data. I guess we're kind of taking the same idea of just saying, well, let's not just do it for personal data, let's do it for all data.
Well, of course, I think it's that effectivity. It's about really understanding how the heartbeat of the organisation works and really being able to put your hands on that at any one point in time. You know, my biggest thing about this is really around change management and you know, that whole shift to the left around changing business models. How do we adapt with agility to represent those actions?
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. So what do I really mean about data management collaboration as such? Well, this is to do with really going back to the heart of your business strategy. Your data strategy should underpin what kind of business outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. A lot of that might be driven by innovation, change, some of your typical traditional R&D investments, but also looking at some of the performance and insight that your organisations are trying to achieve. But impact, that will come down to your data supply chain. And what I mean by that is your end-to-end. Then down to your data governance and data management practices, which you've either got in situ or looking to evolve over time. And then you've got your other cross-functional roles and responsibilities. So these would be your typical PMO, finance, stakeholders, people, organisation. So how do we actually then bring that whole data management into one outfit per se, rather than just having those independent, distinct groups of people?
Okay.
So one of the projects that I've been involved with here at Agile Solutions is Project Everglades. And this is just giving you a bit of a real-life example of how we have taken a traditional business approach and went into the data-driven world, per se. So really this is to do with an analytics-based approach to look at our data across multiple platforms. So some of the objectives were to look at how we could combine our consulting, our marketing, our sales data and try and get much more insight into how the business was actually operating rather than just being on gut feel. So we needed to tighten up our divisional alignment on that. We wanted to shift away from our manual processes. So I think you alluded to before, Andy, around, you know, some of those, some was manual, some was paper-based, some was not, you know, as quality as it could be, to really then start looking at reduction and duplication of creating data and get away from this rudimentary reporting, which is all about just the statistical reports that you get at the end of the month. What's the impact of that on your financial bottom line? However, we were not really seeing what was happening in between on a day-to-day basis around those KPIs. So by doing that, we could improve our management of the risk profile to the business. How could we just sort of mitigate that as much as we could? What other opportunities did we have through innovation, and what was our pipeline looking like? So we had much more visibility on our growth. However, this just didn't happen as a one-trick pony. We had to go through very many states around some continuous learning, have a look at the data, what was it telling us, so that we could learn upon that and then reapply it.
So this is you as an organisation applying what you do to yourselves in reality.
Absolutely, you've got to drink your own champagne sometimes.
I like that analogy. That's a good one.
Yeah, so what were some of the key challenges for Agile Solutions? Well, as I said before, we had to move away from the sole reliance on gut feel decisions. We clearly had some data to back that up, but a lot of it was to do with, we've seen this before, or, we don't want to go down a particular route because we've tried that before and it didn't work, or what have you. But what were really the behaviours that we were trying to drive, and could we actually measure what they were?
Yep.
So our senior management team were clearly looking at some of those KPIs, what did they expect to see, and how could we drive some of the effectivity and growth there. But first of all, it was looking at the data availability. What did we have? Was it of good quality? Was it timely? Did we have the data that we needed? And, were we operating within our own GDPR regulations at the time?
Yep.
And clearly, as much as I'm an advocate for digital transformation and data transformation not being solely on technology, still needed to look at the sort of capability that we needed to drive that forward.
Of course.
So what does it really mean to be data-driven? Well, in this instance for Agile Solutions, we had a three-stage approach to this project. What we were looking at is the KPI development that would drive the business strategy. So this is around measuring what those business outcomes were going to be. We had to test those assumptions as well, because you can't go down too far down the road without really then testing how you're going to get that data and go back. And then refine what our data collection strategies were around that. So that took a little bit of education, rework, and sort of manual data entry upfront positioning. Second piece was all around our data platform. So we needed to ensure that we had our applications and our data integration much more tightly coupled. So we went through a sort of analytics and platform integration with Informatica to bring all of that together, which helped create our data supply chain. And then the third part is really about how did we embed the data management culture. And this again was across consulting, sales streams, marketing streams, HR streams, to ensure that we were looking at it from an enterprise approach and not just a divisional approach. So the target architecture for some of the platforms that we looked at, as you can see, we had about 25 distinct cloud platforms to begin with. So this was really about amalgamation of all of this data into our Agile data lake, and then pushing it into a sort of self-service reporting data model, which would then give us those KPIs. It's not very clear on this diagram, but I would like to just point out that it was very much a sort of elastic reporting structure. So we could get to a point where if we needed to do that refinement, it would push it back through that BI layer.
Right.
So it really just rationalised on that platform there.
And I guess one of the things that kind of strikes me about this is that in terms of your approach, then you've got a relatively finite number of systems which are in scope. I guess for many organisations living with this, actually they may have hundreds or thousands in scope. I mean, do you see this as being a scalable approach for organisations of that size?
I think for us, it was typically would be much easier because we were cloud first approach. We had those sort of principles embedded from the beginning, appreciating that if you've got a landscape of 12,000 plus legacy applications, that architecture is going to take a while to sort of overcome. But I would still go back to the first principle, which is you need to think about what your data is actually trying to achieve, what you're going to do with it, what's the outcome, and what's your strategy. Then your solution and your sort of IT strategy, if you like, should then follow on from that, so that you can deal with the IT transformation, if you like, that would then support what the data strategy and initiatives need to look like.
So this kind of works on all scales. I guess maybe just about this idea we talked about digital transformation potentially being a multi-year journey. I guess this is maybe part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll be different for everyone. So what was the final outcomes of what we actually achieved with this? Well, we made sure that whatever we were going to do had a value proposition. So it's all about starting small but thinking big. So clearly you can't eat the whole elephant, as they say in the business world, but we had to make sure that whatever we did, we would run with it in an agile way, had that minimal viable product, and then be able to scale on that. We did take it from a user-centric approach, so we'll touching slightly back onto your business processes, Andy, around making sure that this was to do with how the users across the enterprise were going to perceive and look at this data and really think about what decisions and KPIs were in it for them. So we've designed the data structures around that.
Okay.
Clearly, operational effectivity and relevancy, so we don't want any surprises, so we don't want to have to reforecast or redo this or redo that because the data changed so significantly over a small period of time. Distributed set of connected data, and I think that's really what the purposeful aim was to do that across that data platform, just around clear automation, orchestration, which then gives you that frictionless data management. But you know, we're all human here, so it's at the end of the day, it's about that. So education piece, governance piece, and then continuous learning and feedback.
So I guess one thing that jumps out to me, coming back to one of those previous slides, I think the comment you were making, Mel, about kind of who's engaged in this. You've got people who are data professionals in your business, clearly, and you've got people who are not data professionals because that's not their required function. So you're putting in place something for everybody, and I guess that's common to pretty much every business that's going to be listening to this.
Yes.
So I guess one of the things that kind of jumps out from looking at this kind of with the start small, the think big, then obviously there's different component parts to that. I guess looking at where this goes in the future, I guess you've got some plans as to where this is going to go to?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it just doesn't stop there. We have to look at what we need to do. We need to think about, you know, some of the external impacts, environmental impacts of what's happening with the nature of the work that we do. But like most sort of small to medium enterprises out there, the whole point is to be agile and be nimble as much as you can do to cope with any change in circumstances.
Right.
Or to the point where you can do your business planning cycles a lot simpler. And then if you want to take your business on a different recourse, it's much easier to do that.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
Thanks. So some of the next steps that we'll be looking at, as Andy pointed out, is to really just to look at the refinement of our own data strategy, because as I say, we have to go through those continuous learnings to be able to do that. Optimization of other platforms and analytics so that we become a full data-driven organisation, and then have the hand staff on the education piece. So it doesn't just stop there with compliance. There's continual data management education going on over and above technology.
Makes sense.
So Andy, how does all of this relate to digital transformation in your space?
Well, actually, it's a really interesting question, Mel. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking with lots of different types of companies, different sizes, you know, large through small, across different parts of Middle East, Africa, Latin America. So we've got, you know, very mature to very new businesses. And actually, but I think this idea of a data management culture is actually getting organizations thinking about data on their digital transformation journey. It's kind of putting data at the heart of a lot of things that they're doing. And actually at Informatica, excuse me, one of the things that we talk about is kind of organizations who are on a journey through digital transformation. And the idea that organizations are on a journey is a little bit about what it is they're trying to achieve, how they're trying to achieve it in terms of driving some of those outcomes that you were talking about earlier. The way that we tend to look at this, actually, it's going to be quite a simple model, but actually it helps kind of get people thinking about, okay, how could we make this work for us? And your idea of start small means we've got to start somewhere. This is where we quite often see organizations starting. So it may be that organizations are trying to become that cloud first, drive that agility. So actually, what does that mean? Particularly, we've got kind of a hybrid world and we've got a multi-cloud world that most organizations are kind of thinking great opportunity, but also, you know, it brings in complexity and challenge, as you guys know, because that's clearly where you are. We've got lots of organizations, particularly in regulated industries, who are thinking actually compliance is a really big deal. So how do we maybe transform and use that as a driver? Clearly, if you're using data for compliance, you can use it for other purposes as well. A great example, I think, from you, combining the idea of next generation analytics, making data available and the analytics available so you can make better, more informed, less gut feel decisions. It sounds like that's clearly the road, the journey that you're on. And the last one that we see is actually organizations saying, in terms of some of the customer experience side of what we're trying to do, then actually this idea of 360 engagement, of actually just making sure we have all the right information together, maybe about our customers or our suppliers or anyone else, really to build that view of data so that when we go to do things like the analytics that you're talking about, then, you know, we have the confidence we've got all the right insights to make all of this work together. So actually each one of these, I think, kind of adds value in its own right. But actually, I think when you put them together, it helps drive that concept of a data management culture. And that's kind of what we've been talking about through the rest of this. I guess one of the things that we talk about is this idea of data management culture, but actually we've kind of categorized it, I think, really to try and help organizations kind of get a sense as to the broad topics that we're going to be talking about, you know, through the rest of this year. So obviously today we talked a bit about data strategy and collaboration. Certainly one of the other areas we've been talking about is data governance, which you've already mentioned, Mel. Clearly it's a space that's important to me, so that's clearly obviously very important, but also this idea of process. And we've introduced this idea of moving away from being a process driving data to data driving process and what that means. And clearly there's maybe going to be a bit of a halfway house, a bit of compromise in kind of where organizations get to. But clearly that change, I think, is really important. And I think you guys with Project Everglades are showing what that could look like. And then that's the last piece, which is really around, you talked about the pipeline and about having the platform, but actually having the architecture and the technology in place to enable you to actually realize all this, so you're getting the benefits out of it. So we've kind of categorized data management culture into some of those kind of 4 broad areas. And just to kind of give a sense as to what that might look like, if we kind of go down a level, it's what we call the attributes of a data management culture. I mean, today we've been talking about kind of the data strategy, a bit about people and roles, responsibilities, about getting collaboration, about getting the business working together. And you talked very nicely in Everglades about how that works, how data is connecting to the business. But there's a lot more that fits into this. Just thinking about some of the traditional things, like, well, what is the data, and about data quality, that's even more important now, probably for digital transformation than it ever was. Just thinking about how change impacts an organization, about this idea of going from being process driving data to data driving process. Oh, wow, that has lots of impact, both upstream and downstream in terms of what we do. So putting all of the attributes together, I think if we can start to think about how we package all this up, but think that start small idea that you talked about, but also think big, I think that's really going to help organizations drive that data management culture, which is really going to unlock the value of the data-driven digital transformation. And actually today, what we've been talking about is really the 4 on the left-hand side. I guess the big question is, why do organizations need a data management culture? Well, we kind of talked to that at the beginning. And this idea that actually it's about transformation. We talked a lot about transformation, but actually kind of the why, which is we need to survive, we need to get to a good place, and then we need to thrive. We need to build on that and kind of build for the future. So really what we're trying to do, I think, today, Mel, on this call is just kind of whet people's appetites for actually organizations are thinking about this. And I think through Project Everglades, you're showing that this is happening and it can happen and it can drive positive outcomes. So I guess for people listening to this, if you do want to know more, then today was really just to give you a sense of kind of our thinking and where we're going. And we'll be running a number of further webinars throughout the rest of the year around those themes that we talked about earlier. And we'll also be running a number of roundtables. The idea being is that if people want to come and hear more, they want to get some ideas, they want to think about how all this might work for them, then that's going to be a perfect opportunity to do that. So the next roundtable events, which is really going to be focused around data strategy and around collaboration, kind of the topic we were talking about today. First one's going to be in London on Tuesday, the 30th of April. And then we're going to have a same topic, but in a different location, going to be in Glasgow on Wednesday, the 1st of May. So put that in your diaries. Definitely a great opportunity, I think. And I think also one of the attachments that goes with this call, with an invite to that with details and etc. So you can go and sign up to that. To give you a sense to kind of what's coming after those dates, we'll be running another webinar, and we'll also be doing some roundtables specifically around data governance. We'll be doing webinars and roundtables around this process, this idea of going from process driving data to data driving process. And then we'll be doing another webinar and roundtables around architecture and technology, really rounding out across 2019 how organizations can use it to drive their data-driven digital transformation. So I guess we've done a bit of talking now. And actually, one of the things I think, Mel, I'd like to do is kind of kick off with we've got some questions come in while we've been talking. Yep. So we've got a bit of time. Let's kind of use the time for a little bit of Q&A. So let me start with this first one. This is kind of comes way back to the beginning. So what's the difference between a data strategy and a data analytics strategy? Surely these are the same thing.
Yes, Andy. Yes, yeah. I mean, I have heard some of this before, and they think a data strategy encompasses quite a lot of things, ideally. However, a data strategy is very specific because what it's trying to achieve is actually the business intention of how you're going to use your data, how that data is going to be capitalized and monetized into information and knowledge within the organization, what it means for the business, and more around describing the types of capabilities that you require. And that isn't just about technology, that is about, your people organization, sort of change management organization. What you're going to actually see is that on the ground as a vision for your business moving forward. So you could very well have a roadmap that would come after your data strategy, that would lay out your intention of how and when you're going to reach some of those milestones. But ideally, data analytics would be one step on that platform. It would just be an intention in its own right.
So I guess the one thing kind of adding to that is, and maybe you see this, I certainly do, is that I think organizations today are very, very focused on the analytical aspects. I see lots of organizations who are very advanced in terms of their thinking and use around artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. But I don't see as many organizations putting the same amount of energy into the data that's used to feed those analytics. I mean, are you seeing something similar?
Absolutely. Yeah, everything's the next quick win on the technology. The next bright spark, where what kind of new sexy technology is out there that we want to use. So which is all very well and good, because enhancements in technologies will allow us to do far more with the data than we could have ever have dreamt of before. However, without that data strategy, without setting out your intent, it's not set in stone forever. It should be static to a certain extent, but you can maneuver it a little bit just to understand, well, if the business model goes in this direction, how are we going to measure that? And then how do these technologies consume that information to help you get there faster?
So use the technology to support the business direction. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so Andy, I've got another one coming. It's talking about how does technology play a role in fostering collaboration?
That's an interesting one. So, excuse me. I guess maybe make some examples might be the way of trying to help kind of tell that story. So thinking about this idea of getting the organization collaborating and how technology specifically plays a role, I think some of it's about taking some ideas that people already know, and I think some of it's about how we can kind of replay things that people are very comfortable with. People, once people recognize how to do something, then actually just doing it again is really quite straightforward. So let me give some examples. Easiest thing is, if you're looking in your day-to-day life and you're looking for something on the internet, you'd go to a search engine and you put in a query and it'd give you a bunch of results back. Well, that's great. We can do that for all the data pretty much on the internet. But how many organizations can do that for their own data? Probably not that many. So actually, if we could take that same idea of just doing a Google-like search, but on an organization's data, with all the filtering and all the options that come with that, then actually that's a good role I think that technology would help play. Thinking about how organizations enable people to do things. You're on a journey around self-service and from an analytical viewpoint, so let people do things self-service so they can go and find things. But actually, let's take some other ideas as well. So what happens if your laptop breaks? The first thing you do is you call the help desk or you log a ticket with the help desk. Let's just take the same idea and say, well, why don't we just log a data ticket? Not particularly radical, but actually just think about the power of that story, whether it be through a different route or an existing route. Actually, what it does, it gives people a place to go when there's a problem, there's something not right. They know what to do because we know how to do that already. And I guess one of the things that the idea of the data ticket, one of the things that frustrates many people about the use of using an IT help desk is you log a call and then you kind of don't know what's going on anymore. Actually, we love visibility. So that's another thing that we can also take from lots of different parts of business. So if you're going to log a data ticket, then actually it'd be really nice to know where is my data ticket? What's the status? What's going on? Who's involved? So, there's lots of little things you can do with technology by kind of replaying ideas that people are very familiar and comfortable with, but just bring it into an organizational business context. And I think that's part of the power of the technology is you can get people doing things because it's instinctive, because they know already how to do it, but just apply it to their own organization.
Thanks, Andy. I think that's quite a nice shift from that process data-centric position that you were talking about.
Yeah. So I've got another one for you here then, Mel. Somebody was just saying, I said, what new roles need to be created to make all this happen, and how do the existing roles fit into this? Interesting one.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, from my perspective, a lot of organisations will have these roles already within their organisation. If they haven't already embarked on the idea that they may need a sort of chief data officer or someone that can take the head leads and is a C-suite, is a decision maker, is on the board, can drive a lot of decision making in this space. then they would initially head up that function or those functional areas that are then responsible and accountable for driving that information. You're still going to need your data governance roles.
Right.
You still need data science, data analytics, data analysts, business analysts. These type of roles will still be required, but it's more around the context of the operational wider enterprise rather than just being assimilated on a project by project basis.
So you obviously work with lots of organisations. I guess one of the things I see is that not all organisations have a chief data officer. I mean, you're saying something similar, but do you see other roles which are kind of doing those things but maybe called something else?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can't get away from the traditional CIO, CTO.
Yeah.
You may also have head of data, that's just that kind of role. A lot of people will say that a CDO is short-lived, it's more of a marketing type position, etc. But I do see it taking on sort of multifaceted responsibilities, because you've still got compliance, you've still got the data protection officer. How does that sort of fit into that function? You've got legal roles, you've got all that other kind of, yes, you'll still have marketing and campaigns, but at the end of the day, if you in a much more data-driven culture, a lot of that then doesn't need the hand cranking that it's used to. So
yeah, and I guess this idea that we talk about kind of moving from process driving data to data driving process, then the significance and importance of data as an asset kind of seems logical to me that you'd have somebody who's kind of responsible for that.
Yes.
So yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. I've got another one here for you, Mel, which is really around the role of data management culture in the fact that it doesn't exist in many organisations. And I guess, actually we've got a couple of questions on this. What's in it for me? I guess the question then becomes is, why do we think this isn't happening, or why it hasn't happened? What's been the barriers to it?
Well, I think, Andrew, from my experience, a lot of it's to do with accountability.
Okay.
Again, we tend to do things from a project scoped, sort of technical approach, or we need to do some investment, so we've got a particular project that we need to undertake. So we tend to do activities from a very siloed position when it comes to data management. So it's either we need a data cleanse activity, or it's a compliance project, or everything's done on a one-step process.
Yep.
But actually, if you do it from a sort of enterprise out, kind of looking at what kinds of things that are non-negotiable, the reality is that the culture of why it's not there is that people don't feel empowered enough to really think at an enterprise level.
Yeah.
So they're always fed that well, you can't think about that because it's not in our scope for delivery, or you can't think about that because you're not the governance person, or But I think at the end of the day, it's everyone's accountability for data.
Yep.
More so than ever, not because of GDPR, etc., and some compliance, but even from an operational standpoint, if there's information that the company and the organisation can capitalise on, why wouldn't you make that available for everyone?
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, cool. I guess actually you've touched on something, so I'm just going to pick you up on another question which has just come in, which is a bit about ownership. So actually somebody was saying, who should own this? That's a really interesting question.
Well, it is, Andrew. I mean, who should own it? I think ultimately the top of the CEO should own the entire gambit of data. It should be as important as any other operational outfit that they may wish to consider as part of how their operations are run. I don't know, Andrew, do you have a different viewpoint on that?
Yeah, I do, but I do think, I spend a lot of time talking to chief data officers, and one of the topics that comes up a lot is around sponsorship and leadership. Yeah. And I think that's at a senior executive level for people to recognize the role of data. So, I just think about people in many industries, the people that lead these organizations are specialists in that industry. So if you're a retailer, people are very good at the retail process and what retailing is all about. So I think there's a recognition that at those senior levels, CFO, COO, CEO, understanding the importance and the role of data, I think is really key. So I think getting that level of sponsorship. I think also then thinking about, how does that feed through into the practical things like, do we have the funding and the projects to make this happen? So how are you going to then use some of these things from a project viewpoint? Because clearly that's how most organizations are going to feel the impact of this, because that's where the value is going to come from once you've delivered the project. But I also then think as it flows down through the organization, if individuals maybe working in a call center or in a store or wherever it happens to be, kind of out of the coalface, if they're seeing the leadership of the company driving this conversation and living these values and ensuring that it flows down and everybody feels empowered, which I think is the words you were using, then people feel that they're kind of much more bought into what's going on and why they should take the time and effort to do it. Because ultimately, we're all going to think, well, what's the benefit? How is this actually going to make things play out? So I think I agree. I think also that the role of the CDO, I just see that probably becoming more important, I think, in the future. Probably not less so, but maybe not everyone's got that title.
Yes, thank you.
I've got one last question for you, and we're just about to run out of time, so sorry for that, and sorry for bombarding you with questions, Mel, but there's probably one I feel kind of actually is quite relevant. So clearly you spend a lot of time out with the clients. Somebody just put in, actually, are people really buying into this? I mean, have you got any examples you could maybe share of other organizations, obviously without naming them, but maybe by industry, of organizations that are buying into this idea?
Well, I don't think that some of the clients that I've worked with started out to buy into the idea.
Right.
I think ultimately they've been forced to recognise it after a few false starts, perhaps, in some of their other sort of solution type investments,
right,
or what have you, when they're year 3 into delivering a huge transformation program, but they don't really think about the data, or the data activity comes somewhat last in the conversation. So
yep.
I think when you start to do the analysis and you get the governance buy-in, and people really start to look at the blueprint and the visibility of what the size and scale of the risk that's imposed on the operationals of the organisations, they start to look at, how do we socialise this? How do we maintain this? How do we get this out to the people in the coalface, or
right.
To those execs, to really understand the implications of some of the decisions that may or may not have happened in that space. So I think that the tide is slowly turning, but it's really just trying to get some traction now as to how to think about data up front as opposed to as the last thing.
And I think that's a really good way to finish off effectively a lot of the content for this session. So they're fantastic. Thank you for that. So we've just run through a few questions that we've had, and so thank you to those people who send in some questions. Just a little bit of a follow-up in terms of kind of where we go from here. If you want to know more, if you want to get engaged in this a bit more, then as mentioned earlier, we are going to be running some roundtables. Here's the dates and the locations. There's a link and an attachment to this, so it will give you details on how you can get signed up and registered for that. I'd just like to say off the back of all of this, thank you very much, Mel. I think today has been really insightful, really helpful for organisations in terms of what that journey is going to look like. I think in terms of kind of where we go next, I guess you'll be with us.
Yes, so I'll be with you, Andrew, to really show some people some practical examples of where we've seen some of this taking place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mel. And thank you to everybody who's been listening this morning. The replay for this will be available fairly shortly afterwards. So if you haven't had time to get through all of this, then you can download and listen to it at your leisure. So thanks very much for your time, and hopefully see you in Glasgow and London fairly shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.